He slept 3 weeks in the Port Authority bus terminal before he wrote the script that would make him one of the most famous men on earth. Not metaphorically homeless, actually homeless. Evicted from his apartment, broke, sleeping on a bench in a New York bus terminal because he had nowhere else to go. He has described the specific calculus of that period in blunt, unforgettable terms. It was either do that movie or rob someone, because I was at the very end of my rope. The movie in question was an adult film. He was paid $200 for 2 days of work. He took it. Years later, a forceps injury at birth had already left half his face paralyzed, his speech permanently slurred, his lower lip drooping in a way that would become, against every reasonable expectation, his most recognizable physical trait. He had been expelled from more than a dozen schools by the time he was a teenager. His parents fought constantly, divorced when he was 11, and he spent his adolescence shuffling between relatives and boarding schools for troubled boys. None of that, not the birth injury, not the homelessness, not the bus terminal, is the part of Sylvester Stallone's story that most people actually know. What most people know is Rocky Balboa standing at the top of the Philadelphia Art Museum steps, arms raised, the single most replicated image of triumph in American film history. What almost nobody asks is how someone goes from a bus terminal bench to writing that scene in 3 days flat, with a wife 8 months pregnant and exactly $100 in the bank, refusing every offer from every studio unless he was allowed to play the part himself. What does it actually take to bet everything, completely, irreversibly, with a child on the way and no safety net underneath you on a story you alone believe in? Sylvester Stallone's career is the answer to that question, and it is a far more deliberate, far more calculated kind of courage than the on-screen muscle ever suggested. Picture a cramped New York apartment sometime in March 1975. Sylvester Stallone has just watched, on television, a boxing match between Muhammad Ali and a relatively unknown contender named Chuck Wepner, a journeyman fighter who, against every expectation, manages to stay in the ring with the heavyweight champion of the world for nearly the entire fight. Stallone cannot stop thinking about it. He goes home that night. He does not sleep. Over the next 3 days, writing entirely by hand, he produces the full first draft of a screenplay about a nobody fighter given an impossible, once-in-a-lifetime shot at the heavyweight title. He calls it Rocky. He is 28 years old. He has spent nearly a decade in uncredited bit parts, soft-core films, and television roles nobody remembers. His bank account holds, by his own later account, barely $100. His wife, Sasha, is 8 months pregnant with their first child. Producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff read the script and want to buy it immediately, offering Stallone $350,000, an extraordinary sum for a struggling actor with almost nothing to his name. There is exactly one condition attached to their enthusiasm: they want a recognizable star in the lead role. Robert Redford. Burt Reynolds. Anyone, in other words, except the unknown actor who actually wrote it. Stallone says no. He holds the line, repeatedly, across multiple offers, insisting that he will only sell the script if he plays Rocky Balboa himself, a decision that, given his financial situation and his impending fatherhood, was not the safe choice. It was the only choice he was willing to make. This story does not begin in that apartment. It begins in a charity hospital in Manhattan in 1946. In a birth so difficult it permanently altered his face before he had even taken his first breath, and in a childhood that, in its own brutal way, had already taught him exactly what it felt like to fight for something nobody expected you to win. Sylvester Stallone was born July 6, 1946, in a charity ward in Manhattan, the elder of two sons born to Frank Stallone, a hairdresser, and Jacqueline Stallone, who would later become a well-known astrologer and fitness promoter. His birth was traumatic in the most literal sense. Forceps used during a difficult delivery severed a nerve in his cheek, leaving the lower left side of his face permanently paralyzed. The result was the slurred speech and the distinctive drooping lip that would, decades later, become inseparable from his entire screen identity, but that, as a child, simply made him a target. He was teased relentlessly for it. He was teased for his name. His parents' marriage was openly hostile, marked by constant fighting that he and his younger brother Frank absorbed for years before the eventual divorce, which arrived when Sylvester was 11. The family had been living in New York's Hell's Kitchen, a neighborhood that offered its own additional layer of difficulty on top of an already unstable home physical abuse and a general sense of parental indifference, compounding the daily strain of his parents' open hostility toward each other. He acted out. Expelled from more than a dozen schools for antisocial and violent behavior before he turned 13, he was eventually sent to Devereux Mar, a school specifically designed for troubled boys, after the family relocated near Washington, D.C., and his mother remarried. It was at Devereux, somewhat unexpectedly, that he discovered he excelled at something structured and competitive, setting track records, winning fencing championships, and taking part in drama programs for the first time. Evidence that the same intensity that had gotten him expelled from so many schools could, when channeled into the right outlet, actually produce real achievement. At 12 years old, he saw the bodybuilder Steve Reeves on screen in Hercules. He has described walking out of that theater and asking himself, directly and without flinching, a question that would organize the rest of his adolescence: Sly, do you want to be a bum, or do you want to be like Steve Reeves? He chose bodybuilding immediately and seriously, not as a hobby, but as a discipline. The first structured, self-directed project of his entire life, undertaken specifically because nothing in his actual circumstances had given him any reason to expect that discipline would eventually be rewarded. He trained obsessively, year after year, building the physique that would eventually become one of the most recognizable in American film, long before anyone outside his own household had any reason to believe it would ever matter to anyone else. Have you ever, as a child, found one single image, an actor, an athlete, anyone whose physical presence seemed to represent the opposite of everything painful about your own circumstances, and built an entire private discipline around becoming something closer to that image, with absolutely no evidence yet that it would ever actually work? That is the exact origin of the body that would eventually make Sylvester Stallone one of the most recognizable physical presences in the history of American film. It started as a boy's private answer to humiliation, years before anyone called it an action hero's physique. He discovered acting seriously while attending the American College of Switzerland, and later studied drama at the University of Miami, leaving just 3 credits short of graduation, unwilling to wait any longer to chase the career he had already decided he wanted. What followed in New York and then Hollywood was nearly a decade of almost uninterrupted struggle. Uncredited roles in Woody Allen's Bananas and in Clute, a soft-core film, made specifically for $200 during the period of genuine homelessness that left him sleeping in the Port Authority bus terminal. Minor television parts. A genuine breakthrough, finally in 1974 with the Lords of Flatbush, sharing lead billing with a young Henry Winkler, but even that did not translate into the kind of momentum he needed. He picked up a memorable supporting role the following year as a menacing race car driver in Death Race 2000, the kind of part that kept him visible without ever quite establishing him as a leading man in his own right. He grew increasingly convinced that acting alone was not going to be his path forward. He turned, deliberately, toward writing not as a fallback, but as a way of controlling something the industry had refused, repeatedly, to give him any control over, which roles he actually got to play. That decision produced Rocky. What happened after he refused to sell the script without the lead role is, by any reasonable industry logic, a story that should have ended in failure. Independent productions with unknown leads rarely succeeded in 1976. The producers, despite their hesitation, eventually agreed to his terms, and United Artists gave him the opportunity. The film was made on a modest budget of roughly $1 million, shot largely on location in Philadelphia, built around a structure Stallone had written specifically to showcase what he could actually do rather than what a studio assumed an unknown actor was capable of doing. He was supported by strong performances from Talia Shire, Burgess Meredith, and Burt Young, with director John G. Avildsen giving the film the kind of earthy, emotionally grounded quality that elevated it well above the standard sports drama formula. Rocky was released in 1976. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations, beating out Taxi Driver, All the President's Men, and Network for Best Picture in one of the more surprising upsets in Academy history. Stallone became only the third person in Academy history nominated in the same year for both Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay. He was 29 years old. He had been homeless 5 years earlier. Have you ever had to bet your entire financial security, your family's stability, and your own credibility on a single piece of work you alone believed in, with every reasonable voice around you suggesting you take the safer path instead? That is exactly the bet Sylvester Stallone made with Rocky. It was not reckless. It was the single most carefully considered risk of his entire career, taken specifically because he understood, with total clarity, exactly what was actually at stake. There is a version of Sylvester Stallone's story that the entertainment press has told for decades, with a certain straightforward simplicity the muscle-bound action star, Rocky and Rambo, decades of sequels, a career built on spectacle rather than substance. That version misses almost everything that actually organized his choices. The version underneath it includes a private grief that he has only recently begun discussing publicly. In 2012, his eldest son, Sage Stallone, born in 1976, the same year as Rocky itself, to his first wife, Sasha Kiak, was found dead in his Los Angeles home at 36 years old, reportedly after not having spoken to anyone for several days. The coroner determined the cause was a heart attack caused by atherosclerosis, with Sage's history as a heavy smoker considered a contributing factor. Investigators found prescription pill bottles in the home, fueling early speculation, but the autopsy confirmed no drugs in his system beyond an over-the-counter pain reliever, a detail Stallone himself addressed publicly at the time, working to correct the rumors that had begun circulating almost immediately. Stallone has spoken about the loss only sparingly across the years since, most directly in his 2023 Netflix documentary Sly, where he made a specific, startling connection between Sage's death and his own earlier work. He revealed that Rocky IV, released in 1990, had been built directly around the strained, complicated relationship he actually had with his real son, a relationship the film let him resolve fictionally, on screen, in ways he was never able to fully resolve in their actual lives. I try to take something that actually is what I wish I had done in real life, but I wasn't able to do that in reality, he explained. And so, quite often, I would do it theatrically, magically. He has acknowledged with evident difficulty that he put things before his family during those years, an admission that the action hero persona rarely made room for, and one that required him to publicly examine exactly the kind of vulnerability his on-screen characters were built to never show. The central irony of Sylvester Stallone's career sits precisely here. a man who built an entire screen identity around characters who triumph through sheer physical will, Rocky absorbing punishment and refusing to fall. Rambo surviving impossible odds through pure endurance was, in his actual private life, dealing with a father-son relationship he could not simply will into repair, and a loss that no amount of physical resilience could ever undo. What Sylvester Stallone built across nearly 5 decades extends across more than just 2 franchises. He is the only person in Hollywood history to have starred in films that opened at number 1 at the box office across 5 consecutive decades. Beyond Rocky and Rambo, he built The Expendables into a new commercial franchise in his 60s, returned to Rocky one final time as a mentor figure in 2015's Creed, earning his first Golden Globe and a 3rd Academy Award nomination 40 years after his first the exact same role, 4 decades apart, finally recognized by an institution that had nominated him for writing and acting in the very first installment but had never returned since. He has continued working steadily into his 70s and beyond, including a notable dramatic turn as a Kansas City crime boss in the television series Tulsa King, a role that critics have praised for bringing genuine vulnerability to a genre he could easily have played on muscle memory alone. He married 3 times to Sasha Sack, with whom he had Sage and his second son Sergio, to Brigitte Nielsen, briefly in the mid-1980s, and finally to model Jennifer Flavin in 1997, with whom he has 3 daughters, Sophia, Sistine, and Scarlett. The Family Stallone, a reality series following Stallone, Flavin, and their daughters, began airing in 2023, offering audiences an unusually intimate look at a domestic life the action hero persona had spent decades keeping almost entirely private. He received the Kennedy Center Honor in 2025, a recognition of lifetime artistic achievement that places the former bus terminal resident among the small circle of artists the American cultural establishment considers genuinely foundational. In 2026, Sylvester Stallone continues working. His memoir, The Steps, named for the same Philadelphia museum steps that made Rocky an enduring cultural landmark, set for publication. His reality series with his wife and daughters airing on streaming television. His career now spanning nearly 5 full decades since that homeless period in New York. He has spoken, in recent years, with a directness about his own regrets and his own family that the action hero persona never previously made room for. He has reflected on having thought I knew everything earlier in his career, and has used his documentary and his more recent interviews to revisit, openly, the complicated cost of building one of the most successful careers in Hollywood history, what it required of his time, his attention, and ultimately his relationship with the son who shared the same birth year as the film that made him famous. There is something genuinely instructive in that reflection, a man who literally willed an entire career into existence from a bus terminal bench through sheer calculated conviction, who built characters whose defining trait was the refusal to quit no matter how much punishment they absorbed, and who has spent his most recent years honestly acknowledging the one fight that physical resilience alone could never actually win for him. Sylvester Stallone's story is not a story about action movies. It is a story about what it actually costs to bet everything on a piece of work nobody else believed in, and about the specific, complicated price that kind of total commitment sometimes extracts from the people closest to you, even when the bet itself pays off spectacularly. What have you bet everything on? With no safety net and no guarantee, simply because you believed in it more completely than anyone around you did. And what did that total commitment end up costing the people you loved most, even in the version of the story where you actually won? Leave that in the comments. Because that question isn't really about Hollywood. It's about every all-or-nothing bet you've made on yourself, and what it asked of everyone standing closest to you while you made it. If this story moved you, leave a like. It costs nothing, and it helps this reach someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories like this one, total commitments that paid off, and what they actually cost along the way. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing from Sylvester Stallone's story that you're taking with you? Because the most important scene he ever wrote wasn't actually at the top of those museum steps. It was 3 days, by hand in a cramped apartment, with $100 in the bank and a baby on the way, betting everything on a story nobody else was willing to believe in yet. We'll see you in the next one.